The air smelled of wet earth and rot as she stepped off the dusty road, the worn boards of the shack groaning under the weight of decades. She had thought this isolation would ease the ache in her chest, a quiet place to vanish from memory. Yet the moment she crossed the threshold, a chill settled in her bones like a warning whispered through the timber. The floor sagged, cracked and splintered, but it was not the decay that made her hesitate. It was the soft, rhythmic sound of breathing. She had driven for hours down a road that dwindled into a ribbon of dirt and gravel, flanked on either side by skeletal trees whose branches clawed at the fading sunlight. The world seemed to shrink the closer she got, the air growing heavier, carrying the scent of wet soil and decaying leaves. Even the sky appeared muted, washed in a gray that bled into the horizon, as though the sun had given up its warmth long before she arrived. When the shack finally appeared, perched at the edge of a clearing like some forgotten sentinel, it was worse than she had imagined. The paint had long since peeled, leaving streaks of gray and brown, and the windows were clouded with dust and grime. Yet, despite its ruin, there was a stubborn defiance to the structure, an insistence that it had endured, that it had waited. She parked the car and stepped out, her boots crunching over the gravel and the brittle leaves that had gathered at the threshold. A cold wind whipped across the clearing, tugging at her hair and coat, and she shivered, pressing her hands to her sides, as if to ward off a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The door, hanging crooked on its hinges, resisted her first push, groaning as if it resented being disturbed. When it finally gave way, a stale, metallic odor met her, mingling with the earthy damp of the surrounding forest. Dust motes drifted in the air, dancing in the narrow shafts of light that pierced the cracks in the walls, and somewhere deep within the shadows, a distant creak made her stop and hold her breath. The interior was smaller than she had expected, claustrophobic in its decay. The wooden floorboards were warped and splintered, each step sending up a muffled groan. Cobwebs clung to the corners and the ceiling beams, brushing against her hands as she traced them along the walls. Broken furniture lay scattered, each piece telling a silent story of abandonment and neglect. The shack was not just empty. It was abandoned in a way that suggested time had forgotten it entirely. Yet beneath the decay, there was a pulse, subtle and almost imperceptible, like the rhythm of a heartbeat echoing through the timbers. She paused in the center of the room, taking in the shadows that seemed to shift with her every movement. There was a weight here, a presence she could not name, pressing down from the corners and the ceiling, from the floor beneath her feet. Her mind tried to reason it away. The loneliness, the ache in her chest, the exhaustion from the drive, but the sensation refused to be ignored. The shack was alive in its own way, and it had noticed her. It had been waiting, and now, with a quiet inevitability, she was inside its walls, standing in the stillness that smelled of damp wood and secrets that would not remain buried. She had barely taken a step into the dim interior when movement caught her eye. At first, it seemed like a trick of the light, a shadow shifting across the warped floorboards. But then she saw him. A man stood in the far corner, his figure partially obscured by darkness, cradling something in his arms. Her breath caught in her throat, and the cold settled deeper into her chest. He did not speak, did not turn, but the presence of life in the room was undeniable. The objects around him, the broken chairs, the tattered curtains, the layer of dust over everything, remained still, as if holding their breath alongside her. The twins. That thought came unbidden, unreasonably, and yet as she squinted, she realized it was true. Two small forms nestled against his chest, their heads resting lightly on his shoulders, swaddled in the faded fabric of an old blanket. There was something wrong in their silence. Not the kind of quiet that comes from sleep or innocence, but a silence that pressed against her ears, heavy and deliberate, as if the twins were aware of her, watching her in a way that defied the natural order. Their faces were pale, almost unnaturally so, and when their eyes lifted to meet hers, she felt a flicker of recognition that went beyond memory or reason. She could not explain it. It was as if she had known them in another life, or perhaps as if they had been waiting for her arrival all this time. The man's expression was unreadable, frozen in a neutral mask, but the weight of him, of the life he carried, pressed into her very chest. He was a figure out of time, existing in a moment that should have ended decades ago, and yet here he was, tangible and terrifyingly present. The room seemed to contract around her, the walls bending subtly, shadows stretching toward her like fingers. Her instincts screamed at her to step back, to leave before the strange tableau could swallow her whole, but her legs refused. Every part of her demanded an explanation, a reason for this impossible scene. She could hear a faint rhythm beneath the silence, the tiny, irregular breaths of the twins, the subtle rise and fall of the man's shoulders. But the sound did not reassure her. Instead, it made the air feel heavier, charged with a tension she could not name. Something about this man, these children, was not meant to be, and yet they were. And the shack itself seemed to hum with anticipation, as if it had orchestrated her discovery from the beginning. The longer she stared, the more certain she became that the room was a boundary, a threshold frozen in time, and that she had crossed it without realizing it, stepping into a story that had been waiting for her decades before her birth. The first sign was subtle, almost imperceptible. A clock on the wall, rusted and grimy, ticked steadily as she entered, but within minutes, the hands froze mid-motion, suspended at a time that had long passed. She shook her head, thinking it a trick of fatigue, yet the silence of the other clocks in the room confirmed something far stranger. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, creeping and twisting in ways that contradicted the angle of the waning sun. She could feel them moving when her back was turned, shifting just out of the corner of her eye, only to vanish when she tried to focus directly. The floor beneath her feet seemed alive in its subtle vibrations, a rhythm that matched neither her pulse nor the faint, deliberate breathing of the man and twins she had glimpsed earlier. It was as if the house itself were breathing, holding her in its chest and measuring her presence. The whispers began that night. At first, she mistook them for the wind, curling through the cracks of the weathered walls, but the sound was too deliberate, too articulate to be mere air. They murmured in half-formed phrases, fragments of sentences that she could almost, but not quite, understand. Her own name slipped into the cadence of their speech, and a cold dread settled over her, as if the house were reading her, learning her thoughts, threading them into its own narrative. Doors that she had left open now stood shut, locked by an invisible hand, and the faint scuff of footsteps echoed across the boards where no one walked. She tried to leave the shack that night, but the landscape outside seemed to warp. The trees she had driven past twisted unnaturally, and the path to the road stretched beyond recognition. What should have taken seconds to reach now demanded minutes that felt like hours, a distorted continuum that resisted her escape. Objects shifted when she wasn't looking. A photograph on the mantel tilted, then fell, exposing a hidden layer of dust, marked impressions beneath. Chairs she had moved returned to their original positions, as if guided by unseen fingers. And most unsettling of all were the whispers of the twins, soft and deliberate, filtering through the cracks in the floorboards, the walls, and even the air itself. Their voices were small, yet unmistakable, speaking of things she could not have known, of memories that were not hers, yet seemed to rise from the marrow of her bones. She began to notice other anomalies too, reflections in cracked mirrors that showed her standing in rooms she had never entered, fleeting images of herself, or perhaps of someone else entirely, watching her from corners she could not reach. With each passing hour, the shack made it clear that it did not merely house the living and the dead. It could manipulate them, stretch them across time, and hold them where it willed, a trap disguised as sanctuary. As the days, or perhaps hours, for time had begun to lose meaning within the walls of the shack, passed, she began noticing traces that felt oddly familiar. A small trinket on a windowsill, the edge of a faded photograph, tucked beneath a broken chair. Even the pattern of dust on the floorboards seemed to echo fragments of memories she had never lived. At first, she told herself it was the mind's desperate attempt to anchor her to reality, a trick of grief and fatigue. Yet the more she lingered, the stronger the pull became, an invisible thread winding through her chest, tugging her deeper into the shack's shadowed heart. In the photograph, a woman stared back at her with the same eyes she recognized in herself, and the twins, pale, unnervingly quiet, seemed almost to shimmer in acknowledgement, their gaze tracing her movements with a weight that pressed upon her chest. It was as if they remembered her long before she had remembered them, as though the shack had preserved fragments of her existence she had never known she possessed. She began finding objects that resonated with her past in ways she could not explain. A locket identical to one she had lost years ago sat atop a rotting dresser, its chain cold beneath her fingers. Letters, yellowed with age, contained phrases she might have written, thoughts she might have thought, yet in handwriting that was undeniably foreign. The shack was revealing pieces of her own life she had buried, or perhaps had never lived, and each discovery unsettled her more deeply. Every item, every whisper of memory, suggested a connection not merely to the space, but to the man and the twins, as though they had been waiting for her arrival across decades, anticipating her presence with patience only eternity could sustain. She could no longer ignore the sensation that she had been drawn here intentionally. In the quiet hours, when the wind rattled the broken shutters and shadows flickered against the walls, she felt the shack observing her, studying her reactions, testing her understanding. The twins' soft murmurs no longer startled her. They spoke with a familiarity that cut through the haze of time, offering fragmented guidance, warnings she instinctively recognized. She began to suspect that her pain, her grief, had been the beacon that led her to this place, that her desire to escape had been predestined to intersect with their frozen existence. The shack itself seemed to hum in acknowledgement of her realization, the timbers vibrating faintly beneath her feet, carrying the weight of truths too vast for words. Somewhere in its shadows, a secret connected all three of them, binding her to a story that began decades before her birth, and yet was unfinished, waiting for her to uncover the link that tethered her life to the man, the twins, and the silent, unyielding heart of the shack. The decision to leave came suddenly, a sharp and desperate need to escape the suffocating weight of the shack, to breathe air that was not thick with dust, shadows, and secrets that belonged to another time. She moved toward the door, each step measured and deliberate, but as she reached for the handle, it resisted as if fused to the frame. Panic rose in her chest, a bitter heat that made her fingers tremble, yet she tugged harder, the door groaning and rattling, but refusing to yield. Behind her, the twins' quiet murmurs rose slightly in pitch, almost a warning, almost a plea, while the man remained still, a sentinel of unyielding patience. She took a step back, shaking her head, and tried another exit, a narrow side window she had overlooked, only to find the pane jammed, unmovable, as though the wood itself had grown into place since the moment she had first arrived. The shack had no intention of letting her go. The forest outside, which had seemed so reachable before, now seemed to recede with every glance. Trees twisted, elongating unnaturally, their shadows stretching into the clearing like grasping fingers. The path she had driven down disappeared into a void of fog and shadow, the gravel and dirt of the road transforming under her eyes into a shifting landscape that betrayed her every instinct. Panic gnawed at her as she realized the shack was not simply a building, not simply a relic of abandonment. It was alive in its own malevolent way, bending reality to maintain its hold, warping the world beyond its walls to trap her. The whispers followed her, growing louder, threading through the boards, the corners, even the air itself, murmuring secrets she was only beginning to understand. She ran from room to room, desperate to find another exit, but every door she opened led her back into spaces she had already traversed. Hallways lengthened impossibly, ceilings lowered, shadows crept along walls with a sentience that made her skin crawl. The twins' soft, deliberate voices called to her from the corners, revealing truths and half-truths, and the man's figure seemed to flicker in time, appearing closer and farther, always in her periphery, but never allowing her to fully confront him. The shack tested her, pressed her against the boundaries of fear and understanding, forcing her to confront a reality that defied reason. Every instinct told her to flee, yet every action she took seemed to cement her presence, rooting her deeper into the very fabric of the house. It was no longer just a structure. It was a trap, a living memory of 1960s anguish and longing, entwined with her own pain, and as the shadows stretched and twisted around her, she realized that leaving might not be something she could choose, but something she had to survive.